Does defensibility matter? Where does it come from? There's a spectrum, but it usually comes down to something around data. If you're actually like an AI native company, that means you're doing a lot of inference, pushing data into the models, potentially doing your own training of models, being in the flow of interesting data that's proprietary that you can then make your systems better on. That historically has been defensible, but it's taken up a notch with AI, obviously, because the amount of leverage you can get out of data is really powerful.
Nikhil Raman is a world-class investor
who has backed multiple fast growth companies.
So I think founder market fit is really important and it can be really powerful. The most important thing is just...
Hey there, my name's Alfie Whattam. Welcome to the Decoded podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you click the follow or subscribe button wherever you're watching this, and I hope you enjoy the episode. So, Nikhil, you're a VC at USV, which is invested in like legendary companies like Twitter and Stripe and Coinbase and Cloudflare and Stack Overflow and like so many other unicorns. But what about you personally? Like when you're hearing a pitch, when you're meeting with founders, what are you looking for when you're deciding to invest in a startup?
That's a great question. I'm looking for a number of things. I would say one of the core things I'm looking for is how thoughtful the team is about the thing they're working on. And often that boils down to asking the right questions to tease out how deeply they've thought about the problem space, who has tried this before, what different flavors have worked, and what the right lessons to take away from those things were. And then beyond like depth of thinking and thoughtfulness on the product, I'm also looking for some articulation of why what they're working on can grow and grow efficiently. And then number two, why it can be defensible long term. And that's something I think we index on a lot at USV, and potentially we over-index on it, arguably. But it is kind of core to how the firm kind of got started and the types of investing we did early on, which was very much leaning towards consumers and the networks that were built between humans. And those ended up being fundamentally very defensible, and we called it network effects. And we kind of look at a lot of the way we invest through that lens. So I'd say that last point, defensibility, is probably like one of the biggest things. But the first 2 points around like thoughtfulness and how they can grow are also really important.
Yeah, I mean, I get the growth one. If it's VC backed, it has to be scalable to the point where it can be a unicorn. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. When it comes to the idea maze and navigating that side, like when I've done angel checks before, I've found that it's great to ask those questions to make sure the founders have given it the time of thought. Because if you're able in a pitch meeting to ask a question that they don't really know the answer to or they haven't thought about, I mean, it's usually a red flag, because like this is what they do 100 hours a week, hopefully. And you're in a half an hour meeting, if you're able to come up with an idea they haven't quite thought about and they can't articulate, even if they don't have an answer, it needs to be like a version of, hey, I've thought about this, here's what I'm thinking. Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, you're saying exactly what I'm thinking. I think that's spot on. And particularly at the stage that we invest at, usually the business is a little more mature, or oftentimes almost always they have a product in the market. And so at that point, like you can have a very grounded conversation. But I do think we often talk to teams who are pre-product and still like skew more idea stage. And even then it's like, I think very important to have like thought through most of the reasonable questions that can come up.
Yeah. On the subject of defensibility, like
Yeah.
where are the moats now in a world of AI? Like if you can vibe code like something that you can then get funding on, and then if distribution can be achieved by kind of going viral on socials, like what is the moat in the world of AI?
I feel like this has been the hot topic for not just the last 3 months, but probably the last 18 months, is questions around, does defensibility matter? If so, where does it come from? I think, well, I'll answer the core question, but I guess taking a step back, I think AI has been the last, like I say, 2.5 years in AI since the ChatGPT moment have been so dynamic that I think it's critical to reason about defensibility, but probably even more important in the short term, at least backwards looking, maybe not forwards looking, has been just being in the water and moving fast. I think if you have no story you can tell yourself or orientation around why this becomes defensible, that's pretty problematic. But I'm also very I'm sensitive or sympathetic to the argument that that thinking comes secondary to just moving fast and being in the water and feeling out the contours of the market because it's been so dynamic. But then to the substance of your question around where defensibility comes from, one thing that we talk a lot about is, well, at its core, for consumer products, a lot of the defensibility can still come from some sort of network effect. But it's been really fascinating to watch, ChatGPT, which is probably one of the largest consumer products ever, to be almost entirely multiplayer. I would argue it is single player, entirely single player, and also like have no sense of network effects in any form. It's just incredibly powerful product with incredible word of mouth and incredible brand awareness. So I think, normally I'd say at the consumer level, you end up having some sort of tethering of either agents or humans together. But I think defensibility, the way we think about it in AI is there's a spectrum, but it usually comes down to something around data, right? Like, at its core, if you're actually like an AI native company, that means you're doing a lot of inference. You're pushing data into the models. You're potentially doing your own training of models, and being in the flow of really interesting data that's proprietary, that you can then make your systems better on in a compounding way. That historically has been defensible in many waves of ML, and it's what made a lot of the great products like Google really defensible in their ad networks. But it's taken up a notch with AI, obviously, because the amount of leverage you can get out of data is really powerful. There is a nuance though, which is yes, there are data flywheels, which is where I think a lot of the defensibility in AI products come from. However, not every data flywheel is made equal, and you might be building a product that is getting really good at assessing legal contracts, let's say, and you kind of are able to see where your customers are accepting your kind of contract you're generating or rejecting them, and you can learn from that. There's a chance that maybe that plateaus, and maybe you actually only need to see 1,000 contracts across 10 customers to get it really good. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe it takes tons, and maybe the plateau is much deeper in the product lifecycle or data lifecycle. And I think we think a lot about are there real proprietary data flywheels in this business, and where do we think that actually will plateau? And because a new entrant might be able to spin up a product that's really competitive if the data flywheel is not as thick as you thought it was.
I can relate to that deeply. I mean, I build AI agents for recruiting and in that world, and when we're analyzing resumes and CVs and interviews, that's all unique data. That interview's never been done before in that way, in that style, with those questions asked. That CV does not exist anywhere else in the world in that words and that format. So having something that's unique and that's proprietary that you can't just find on an existing off-the-shelf large language model, that's what gives you a little bit of a moat. Now, I love your earlier point about speed. I feel like your moat is the 996 work that you've done to put you 6 months ahead of your competitors, because if you then get complacent, then they'll catch up, and then the moat's kind of gone. When you mention around those examples around people building in legal contracts, for example, or in my world of recruiting, I was a recruiter for a decade before I kind of went into that world. So I had the perfect founder market fit to build what I'm building. How important is founder market fit to you? A lot of these newer concepts, especially with AI, it didn't even exist a year ago, some of the markets people are entering. So they might not have that industry background. But when you're evaluating an idea, how important is it that the founder has kind of worked in that space, or they've got that understanding of the domain?
It's a really good question. I think that assessment of that question is sort of maybe upstream of the question around how thoughtful one is around their business. We've invested in folks, and I've interacted with folks who had no obvious tethering to the business they're now working on. But if you talk to them about why they're able to be so thoughtful about this thing that they're working on, it came from either deep research prior to working on the project, or a bunch of conversations over many years, even though they weren't working directly in that space. And so I think founder market fit is really important, and it can be really powerful. but I think I care a little bit more about, how much do you understand what you're working on? How passionate are you about it? How thoughtful are you about it? And you can arrive at that from having worked in that industry, having domain knowledge for 20 years, or you can also just arrive at it, just through gathering context from living life and being an operator. So I don't think it's like it's not something we really talk about at USB, at least, as being a blocker to investing in anybody. We're more looking like, do they really understand the space and care about it?
This is a quick message to tell you about my company, Alpha AI. We built Lisa, the world's first AI recruiter who finds candidates for you on autopilot. Visit welovealpha.com now to learn how it works, or click the link below in the description. And now, back to the episode.
Before Venture, you were part of the founding team at the fintech Daffy. So what did you learn from being in a startup yourself, which applies to your role when you're working with different CEOs today in different fields?
The most important thing is just like having an understanding of what it even is. I think in many parts of life, you often just don't know what you don't know. And at least I kind of know what I don't know in this case, where it's like, I know what it looks like to go from no product, from nothing, to having a product in the market, to trying to iterate on the product and grow it, and what it looks like to go down the idea maze early in a product and to change different marketing strategies and go through all the ups and downs of kind of 0 to 1 and 1 to 1.5. And it's not the same for all products. This is very much a pure software play that we were building. And at USB, we work with a lot of non-software businesses. So, and within software, obviously, there's many different go-to-markets and many different flavors of products. But I think that the thing that's been most helpful for me is just feeling somewhat grounded in my understanding of what an entrepreneur is going through at those stages. I think I don't necessarily pull from it for when I'm trying to give advice, but I think it does help me know what are the right questions to ask sometimes. So I think that's helpful.
But what about if you were doing this again? If you were involved in the creation of a new company again, you're part of the founding team. What market would you be betting on? Obviously that was a few years ago now. That was kind of pre-LLM. If you were starting again from scratch today, what would you be going after? What problems excite you?
It's a good question. Obviously, AI is going to reshape our whole world, and I'm extremely long AI and optimistic that even if we go through a bubble or undulations in the market, I think I'm incredibly optimistic that we're heading up into the right in terms of technology improving. All that said, I think the markets the areas I've been most excited about the last few months is kind of everything happening around how capital and markets are being reshaped. We spent a lot of time on that stuff at USB in conjunction with AI, and this looks like everything from, I would say, new pockets of consumer and market activity, which might look like the wave of prediction markets. It might look like a lot of the world's assets starting to be tokenized, whether it's equities or bonds or private credit, and coming on chain, and assets being able to interact with one another because they're all on the same common foundation, and what that spells for the opportunity set, both for consumers and businesses. So we've been spending a lot of time on that. I think in the last couple weeks, I've been turning my wheels a lot on what Robinhood and Coinbase and some of the legacy players like Fidelity and prime brokers have always kind of been trying to be one-stop shops for an entity or individual's financial needs. And given that you have asset class expansion, we have new types of assets, new types of markets. Simultaneously, we have new types of underlying infrastructure for all these things. Are there openings to become these universal stores for consumer finance and institutional finance? So I think that's maybe a little bit narrow, but it's one thing I've been spending a lot of time on the last month.
I'll go even narrower then. You mentioned prediction markets, and I kind of feel like some of these so it's Kalshi, and then what's the other big one? Poly. Yeah. I kind of feel like that TAM, I mean, this is a tale as old as time, but that TAM, those companies have got such a great brand in that space right now that if Robinhood or Fidelity were trying to build their own prediction markets type product, I kind of feel like that brand of what those companies do is so closely aligned in the consumer's mind that it's going to be extremely hard for them to do so. But I feel like they certainly, like I interviewed one of the first investors in Robinhood a couple of weeks ago, and like his general consensus was like the founders and the CEO, they will probably try this kind of thing, and you know, you have to kind of try these moonshots from time to time. But do you think that market in like the prediction world is still open for other players, or do you think like the branding there is kind of too closely aligned to those two winners at the moment?
Well, I think we've kind of voted with our feet there a bit, because we have made a bet in the prediction market space.
Okay.
Awesome. in a company called the Clearing Company, and we made that investment back in February of this year. And yeah, I think we believe we think prediction markets as infrastructure are wildly fascinating. We also believe that they're very early still. They've gotten a lot of uptick in the last 4 years, and specifically last year, around politics and then sports. And they're very disruptive to how, you know, sports betting used to operate. And they're massively expanding a market that didn't fully exist before around politics and elections. But those are just kind of like the early beachheads in a way. And they might always be the largest beachheads, but I think there's so much other real estate to touch, and also so much other like mechanism design and market design to touch as well, and different mechanics to explore. I think, like, you know, one vision that we have at USV, and we'll see if we can get there, is for prediction markets to also look like UGC platforms. Like, Alfie, you should be able to stand up a market, and the market you can stand up can be a global market. Like, maybe it's on some event that you don't see listed and you want it to exist, or maybe it's something local with your friends. So like at any scale, you should be empowered to go create markets. And similar to like other UGC platforms, you know, a very small percentage of users, like 1%, will actually create. But people will get good at it. You'll have really good creators on the platform. And then only like maybe 10% will actually, you know, put capital on the platform and bet. But then 90% will consume and like treat these markets as information. And so I think, one, we think it's early, in the design space is still underexplored in a lot of ways. And but I have a ton of respect for those two platforms you mentioned, Kalshi and Polymarket. They pioneered the market in a number of ways. And I think that space is going to keep growing a lot over time.
Yeah, certainly, and I feel like it will be startups that become the next Kalshis and Polymarkets in the same way that they did, and it wasn't an existing legacy Fidelity type brand that claimed that market. Okay, but prior to the venture, prior to founding, you worked at Google. What do you think separates like these world-class founders, Nikhil, like the Sergeys and the Larrys and the people that are able to build trillion-dollar companies versus like the majority of founders who unfortunately just don't make it? Like, what do you think are the key things that make people superstars versus the rest?
That's a good question. You know, I don't think I have, candidly, a ton of firsthand experience with being able to assess that question in a deep way. I mean, I definitely didn't know Sergey or Larry at Google. There's a number of founders who we work with at USV who I've had the privilege of interacting with over the years, whether this is like Matthew Prince at Cloudflare or other similar people who have kind of exited out of our portfolio but have done very well. And you know, in many ways, I think, you know, the folks I mentioned, like Matthew, are exceptional, but they're not too different than many of the other entrepreneurs we work with. They just, you know, other entrepreneurs are just in a different stage of their journey and are less discovered in some ways. And I do think like one thing that really is important is just playing a really long game and being willing to play a really long game. I think it's, you know, when you're working on a business, a startup, it's extremely hard, extremely painful. At many points along the road, you might not want to continue going after that journey fully, and you might kind of sell your business or kind of move on from the business. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think one thing that does really separate kind of the superstars is honestly just kind of longevity. It's the problem space you care so much about, that you have enough traction in, that you're willing to see it out for a decade, multiple decades, 3 decades. So that's the main observation I have. I haven't been up front and personal with a bunch of the greats, so I can't really comment on them.
I mean, if you can build a company like Cloudflare, I mean, it's incredibly painful and incredibly hard to do something like that, and that's why 99.9% of people don't. But you're right; it's people that are willing to stick it out the longest, and people that are willing to chew glass and stare into the darkness and do that, day after day after day after day. That doesn't sound very pretty or glamorous, but that is what it is, and it's going to take a decade in most cases. I know there's some crazy examples of people going from 0 to 100 million overnight, and that's fantastic. But it's probably going to take you 10 years of pain before you start to see any happiness from this.
Yeah, I mean, and in many ways, it's that first decade is obviously very hard. But what I'm wildly impressed by is the people who go after it for that second decade, like Cloudflare or many other businesses that have done really well. Which is they still treat it like a startup and like it's day one, and there's huge white space for them to go after, and they keep leveling up their ambition of where the business can go next, and that's a very hard thing to do.
Cool. Nikhil, this has been a really honest conversation for founders and people wanting to get into venture and so on. If people have enjoyed this and they want to learn more, where should they go? How do they get in contact? LinkedIn or X, or should they go to the fund site?
I'm most commonly on X. I'm at uninsightful on X, and you can find me there. You can DM me there. Also on LinkedIn.
Awesome. All right, Nikhil, thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well, Alfie. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for watching. Hit follow, hit subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Introducing Lisa, the world's first AI-powered recruiter. She's an AI agent who works 24/7, screening candidates on autopilot, conducting interviews in 30 different languages, uploading all the best candidates to your applicant tracking system. Hire 10 times faster at 90% lower cost, and significantly improve the candidate experience. Visit welovealpha.com to start your free trial now.